Okay, awesome. So let us wrap up where we ended when we're looking at some of the effects of the absence of performance management, a formalized performance management system. Maybe just a quick one before we can zoom into that. During the break, I do know people do reflect as they sip their coffee, tea, water, or any other liquids. Are there any questions that you probably might have thought of whilst you were on tea break? Just a quick comments or questions that I can start addressing. Okay, all right. So let us look at the next section. So as we have been covering this subject, and I do want to perhaps position it clearly that at the University of Zululand, there's a very strong emphasis on the benefit of performance management to the organizational aspect of it. So whilst it might be common to many and others that the performance management will tend to focus more onto individual or persons, the institution has taken a stance of, let us make sure that at an institutional level, we're able to position performance management there as well, as much as it is meant for, amongst others, the individual level. So that's why if you look at some of the benefit is, amongst others, looking at promoting standardized framework for organizational planning. Not everyone do participate or attend the strategy planning session. I'm of the view that the strategy document need to be available to everyone, because as part of performance management planning, we do want to dig into what is supposed to be achieved by an institution over the next coming 2, 3, 1, or 5 years. So the promotion of standardized framework of organizational planning can therefore be observed at an institutional level strategy, departmental level operational plan, individual level individual performance planning. That's a linkage we are trying to bring in, and that linkage is emphasized so that the optimum benefit of the performance management or of the institutional objectives are indeed achieved. Number 2, clear outlining organizational priorities at a given period. Strategy plan is long-term. At each year in focus, there will be priorities outlined. Those priorities need to be cascaded down to individual employees. So the benefit of performance management, at least a matured adoption of it, allows this to happen and to take place. Integration, I've spoken about it several times. Integration at all levels, corporate, institutional, departmental, unit-based, individual, and so forth. That is one aspect of looking at it, at the vertical from top to bottom. But the other element of integration, not only on strategy, but of planning rather, is when you start to articulate the expectation for each employee, at the same time, append that with an indication of what the organization is committed to do to assist that particular employee. And I'll repeat that. During the planning of performance, there is a section where you articulate what is expected from an individual. But there's also more than one areas where the organization need to commit as to what they will do to assist an employee. The first area is when the organization commit resources. When you look at our template, there's a KPA, name, there's a waiting for that KPA, then there are a set of activities. Then there are KPIs against each activities. Then there are resources, and in bracket, if applicable. So an individual employee is not the one who's supposed to bring resources to support him in doing the work. That is why tools of trade are necessary. There can be physical resources, including infrastructure. There can be financial resources, including obviously necessary budget. There can also be human resources that include the team a person is working with. So by virtue of that appearing onto an individual performance plan, it simply means an institution is committing itself that on what it is expecting employee to undertake and perform, it is also committing to assist and support by providing certain resources. That is one aspect of it. The second aspect is when we look at the performance development plan further down our template, the university/institution is then saying, based on what is expected from an employee, we are dedicated to embark onto the journey to assist the very employee to develop her own capabilities so that he or she can perform the work accordingly. Now, that is an element of integration, obviously vertical, institutional down to individual. Within the individual element of planning, then you start to see the commitment in terms of resources. You also see the commitment in terms of personal development planning. Those are key areas that one can touch on to demonstrate the issue of integration. Accountability amongst organizational leadership, obviously in this particular case, is enshrined. For an example, at an institutional level, the VC will be in charge of that particular performance agreement, and the council will endorse it. At the departmental level, each and every HOD and DVCs will be responsible for the particular performance agreement, and they will be reporting to the DVC. At an individual level, each individual person will be responsible for the KPIs outlined in his or her individual job profile, and the line manager will obviously endorsing them. So you are able then to be able to see the levels. And we have an HR department who are custodians of the performance management system. In other words, should there be any need whatsoever where there's assistance that is sought or is looked, is required, HR will be available to assist the stakeholders to ensure that there's a smooth adoption from planning, there's a smooth adoption in terms of regular evaluation, there's a smooth adoption in terms of final assessment and aggregating of particular performance scores up until the university is able to make necessary decision with the data that it would have collected as part of the performance information data or the scores as they were. So these are some of the benefits the organization can be able to look at and therefore take advantage of as they implement the performance management system. And let us look at some of the benefits on the personnel level or at an individual level. So already we've spoken about the integration amongst various levels, and we've gone to integration within the individual performance agreement itself, responsibility planning and allocation for each individual. Now, one of the arguments is that a job description easily can be ignored and it might remain outdated for a period of time. It is normal. Organizations do not review job profiles every week or month or year. The organizations whereby the last update was done on the job profile when it was first compiled. I mean, if it's 5 years ago, that obviously would be the duration of when was it last compiled. But with the performance agreement, you are compelled to have an agreement every single year. That means you are compelled to relook at some of the tasks that need to be performed for the year in question in line with the priorities. I've spoken about engagement, and you might see some of the tools that we have engaged university with. There is the clear structure as to where you start, where you can go, and so forth. Now, that means for junior line managers, they don't find themselves out of depth because there's already enough sufficient foundation where you are able to say, okay, for every employee, we have a job profile. Number 2, we already have a strategy. Number 3, let's have a performance agreement. So every employee who's new, you are compelled to sit with him or her and be able to ensure that within 30 days of his employee or her employee, there's a performance agreement. The basis of your discussion going forward about work is already structured based on the agreement. Should there be any amendments, as I've alluded in answering the question from one of our colleagues, it comes back from the performance agreement. We are compelled by the policy that every 6 months, in this case mid-year, there should be a formal performance review. That forms part of the engagement. So it is not a situation whereby you just indicate whatever you you probably want to, and I'm not even talking about meetings, ops meetings and other things. I'm just talking about from the performance management point of view. At least it provides that level of regularity that you should be able to engage on a regular basis. If you want to do it monthly, it's by all means your call, but at least every mid-term or every mid-year, there should be that kind of a formal stage. That is why we call 6 months, and every 6 months is a formal performance review. But there are informal performance reviews that can happen anytime during the year. Objective evaluation of employee performance. Again, if we are matured enough and we've gone through all the paces of learning in terms of adopting the best practices, the element of objectivity or subjectivity rather will be eliminated as we go along, and the element of objectivity will be improved. Once we have a best interest of the company at our hearts and the alignment of each individual personal as well as organizational line goals and ambitions, you start to realize that, look, whether I like someone or I do not like someone, what is important is that both of us, we've got our own personal careers and ambitions, number one. Number two, we're here at least for a common goal of contributing towards the organizational objectives of being one of the best institutions of higher learning. If we can focus on that, only after we've dealt with every work-related aspect, when we meet each other in the mall, we can take our personal agendas up. But at least we are of the view that if it's adopted accordingly, people can only and should focus on the work-related aspect. We are human beings. We are not perfect. And I do know that there might be issues, as some of the questions that were raised earlier on. Number five, also allow a situation formally where we're able to identify gaps, performance gaps in particular, and able to allow parties involved to plan for development accordingly. That's a big thing. I don't think there's anyone who would say, I'm overdeveloped. I don't need to be developed. I don't think there's going to be any person who will say, I'm so good, I'll over exceed all the necessary targets in terms of performance target that I put within an organization. So there's always an opportunity for improvement. Point number five. Therefore, everyone can embark onto that process or onto that journey to improve one's own abilities, working hand in hand with line manager or supervisor, and hence the personal development plan is an opportunity to observe the same. On the other hand, you can imagine if then there's no such good performance levels, this process allows the same to take place. Not only to the better employees who are performing well, even those that are struggling are given an opportunity to be able to improve. So I'm not going to touch deep on this because I've alluded to it several times already. Strategy plan is in place. The works that we do know is in place. However, I think the important part is it accessible to everyone? Because if there is a strategy plan but it's not accessible, the operational plan is not accessible, I think the university has to make means of at least making it available, because none of these documents, based on my limited experience in the industry, none of them are of secret nature. They are confidential, in other words, not to be utilized outside the parameters of the institution, but for employees involved and for other stakeholders internally, it should be made available. Let alone the fact that maybe a strategy might be 40 pages for some organizations or 20, there are certain elements of it that can be made public, that at least it should be shared with the rest of the employee community. Same as operational plan. Job descriptions, it's available in HR, and I suppose every incumbent occupying a particular position has the right to request one if there isn't, and when it's updated and when it is improved, they also have to acknowledge the same. Annual performance agreements, in this case, are compiled as part of this exercise. So earlier on, we spoke about, can a manager influence how performance management is undertaken? Of course. Can the manager influence how performance management system is implemented? Of course. Management, without any doubt, and leaders of the organization, they've got a major influence. That is why in some schools of thought, when we talk about the environment, the readiness of the environment, the factor of a leader, manager, supervisors is not left out when we're looking at the pillars that are influencing the environment. So we are calling on all those who are in leadership positions, in management positions, as well as in supervisory positions, to take note of their influence and requesting them not to abuse their powers. Because for the purpose of performance management, it is not about the manager or the line manager or the supervisor. It's about the organization. The organization entrusts certain duties and or responsibilities onto a manager for him or her to lead a particular team in a particular unit. So be mindful of the fact that yes, managers do have an influence, a very great influence, but that is enshrined by the role that they occupy. If it's used accordingly, it will be to the benefit of all organization, all in the organization, including the organization itself. If it's abused, it's obviously to the detriment of the organization and perhaps some who are affected by some of the manager and that leaders' decisions. So therefore, we don't want to downplay the importance of line managers or managers, but we want to emphasize the fact that they can do so much good to improve the environmental readiness or conduciveness to facilitate an effective performance of its subordinates and employees. So employees, managers and supervisors should be better be able to help and assist employees to acknowledge their strengths and contribute towards the achievement of institutional goals. And I think for me, that just sums it up. If it means as a manager, you then tend to manage other people or lead rather other people with an intention to fail them, I don't think that you are doing justice to the institution. But if you at least deal with everyone, whether you like or you do not like some of those people, for the purpose of what we are discussing today, it is only fair for one to be able to lead all of them towards their greatness. And I think some of the well-known leaders in the world have done some of that, leading people and allowing people to grow, allow people's statues to develop, allow people's capabilities to nourish, allow people's motives, confidence to obviously be consolidated in a way that the person would feel much better under this serving under the particular manager, under this particular leader. So the role of a supervisor in this case is very important, and I cannot underestimate it by any long shot. Anele, were you intending to make a comment? I see there on the screen there is flashing there.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I wanted to say that the challenge with this, what you just spoke about now, is when you find that the same weaknesses or the challenges that a manager might have is the same thing that they come back and tell you is a challenge or a weakness or the reason why you got underrated. And then they are not in the position to then coach you out of that weakness or to actually facilitate help. So okay. I think that's where the challenge then goes back to management who's higher up than the manager that you report to, that what help is being provided for that particular manager, because you might find that that particular manager who has exactly the same weaknesses that you have is getting 5 ratings. Like it's getting 5 out of the rating, but then that same reason is the reason why you are being underrated. So in those situations, how then do you adjust, or how do you then address that issue?
Okay, so if you allow us just to hone in into that, are you talking about the output part, or are you talking about the behavioral part? Now that we know the difference, in the case of this example of you are making, are we talking about the work output, or are you talking about the behavioral part?
The behavioral parts.
Okay. So you are saying it happened that the observers of behavior have rated you a negative, rather, so I will use the term negative loosely, or a lower score on a certain behavior aspect, and hence, or on the other side, your line manager who happens to have the same is rated high on the same aspect. Is that what you are saying?
Yeah, sort of. I'm saying the same thing because you said that the coaching or the support should come from your manager to help you out of a bad rating. I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying now is, in the event where the person who's supposed to give you the help is suffering from the same deficiency, then that deficiency that they're suffering from has not been addressed, or is seemingly seen as a strength because of what they are getting or they are producing because of that weakness. But when you are then underrated the same deficiency, FYI, this is my past experience.
Sure.
So it's not based.
That's fine.
Not based on my current structure. But I think that that I'm trying to just say is that sometimes the issue is the same person who's supposed to be coaching you out of or building you up can't, because they themselves are unable to do that. They are not the actual right platform to do that. I don't know whether it makes sense.
You are. In fact, you are right. There's two ways of answering your question, if I may. The first one is introducing another feature. We normally talk of mentorship, and not all managers are capacitated or are capable of coaching or mentoring, generally speaking. So it can happen that a mentor will be a separate person who then provides such services in a group of a set of employees, depending on the level. So it is not always going to be a point that a manager of yours is also your mentor / a coach. Number one. Number two, again, that is dependent on how the system of mentoring and coaching has been endorsed within an organization. And I'm sure you're familiar with cases whereby some organizations always say someone at the level of senior management and up would always have a coach internally or externally as part of the principles within the organization. Some do not. So in this particular case, as we drive on the path of mentorship and coaching to assist one to develop, a manager is not always or might not always be ideally the person who can assist. Even worse if that person has also got some level of deficiencies. That's number one. Number two, if we come back to the actual inconsistencies in scoring, it might be happening that, especially when talking about the behavioral, it's because of the system that is being utilized. And I'll make an example. I mean, in the space of talent management, we tend to find a lot of pushback from clients when we talk of 360 until, and I'm not trying to raise a situation about our own specific solution necessarily, but I'm trying to show the best practice until they understand how behavioral assessment, feedback sessions need to be undertaken. Now, as soon as they understand that aspect, in a case of, let's assume 10 people are contributors, we call them, are supposed to provide you with feedback. They are not providing you with feedback based on their own terms. They are providing you with feedback based on terms which were predefined during the planning even. So that means we expect such behavior from a person, in this particular case, STEMBIs. And STEMBIs operate at the senior management level. Therefore, on a particular competency, we're going to focus on a behavioral level at a tactical or strategic level. Then that is predefined. All what a person needs to provide towards the end is a rating. And if it means there are 10 contributors, between 1 to 10, including you as an incumbent, all of them can provide different levels of contributors. So it might happen that one person who is your manager might rate you poorly, but 9 other people might rate you affirmative, because their experience with you is different than in terms of experience with your manager. So in that particular case, it's not one person who then who have a stronger indicator on your behavioral aspect. And they don't even discuss this beforehand. Every one of them conducts this own rating separately. Only when the rating has been done, then there's a bit of discussion afterwards. So the level of influence is minimized. I have an experience working with SIPO. I will based on my own experience with SIPO, I'm going to go and provide a rating on behavioral examples I've observed with SIPO. And I'm not being approached to provide this just because now there's performance review. I'm aware right at the beginning that all of us are being observed on this basis of performance in terms of competencies. So I'm becoming conscious. And during the period of a performance cycle or performance period, I'm able to provide certain feedback. And in meetings, we can see that SIPO always reach out to find solutions. We can see that SIPO is not confrontational. And because we are aware that some of those behaviors need to be observed, come the period of observing, conducting assessment, it is not new. We don't have to find deep in our thoughts as to, Konje, when did I and how was it? Because pre-planning or planning part, we notified exactly that we need to observe some of this. Again, the basis of this is transparency. Long before we start embarking, we need to know if you are at this particular level, when we talk about accountability, what behavioral examples are we expecting from you? They are not hidden. At the end, based on what was indicated during the planning, we just observe those. So in that particular way, and I'll just give you a chance now so that I can check whether my attempt to respond to a certain extent cover your question. My indication is that at least not one person will come out stronger and overpower other people. The system, if it's done properly, the collation of those feedbacks is independent of one other person and what other person has said. It obviously can give an aggregate as to tell me what did your peers say. If it means there were 2 peers or 3 peers in your review, tell me what your subordinates say. If it means there were 3 or 2, you can collate that. Tell me what your senior personnel said. That can be your line manager and some other senior person within an organization. Tell me what your customer said. You can be a combination. That's why in the case of what I'm referring to, it allows quite a number of contributors in their own distinct role. Peers, subordinate, supervisors, other external stakeholders, including clients. And you can be able to say, let me zoom into clients. What did they say? Let me zoom into peers. Let me zoom into subordinate. And let me zoom into supervisor. So it does not just become a number. It becomes a number with an element of a dimension that you can look at. Because if you start to see the trend of what colleagues are saying, peers, and what subordinates are saying, and what the clients are saying, and what the supervisor are saying, it should be able to give you a better view. Be it call it 2D or 3D, as opposed just a score, a number that said you were weak or strong onto that. Now, it all comes down to when you do some of these, do them right so that you can be able to derive the right indicator and use it consistently. If you don't do it right, you can do it, but it will then result to some inconsistencies which might lead to unintended consequences. And these are the 2 ways of responding to the question. One, in terms of mentorship, it's not always your manager who should and be your mentor or your coach in a context of an environment where you might be. 2, the environment itself is a contributing factor. How serious or committed are they taking this particular level of assistance and make it provided to you? The second option in terms of looking at your question is the issue of how well is this behavioral assessment 360 review is being done. There are tools out there. That is why if you can't do it right, do not even probably start, because you're going to cause more unintended consequences than what you intend to do with it. Maybe if you can reflect on whether my attempt does help in terms of what we are discussing.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Danielle, it's a pleasure. Okay, there was a study done by Gallup where it looked at a number of factors. These factors were in relation to when an organization defines the level of extent as to how and what it wants to engage employees on, what should they consider? I've spoken about engagement as a factor that can assist organizations to improve its throughput, whereby if it means an organization does engage its employees, then you start to see a positive effect on whatever that the organization is doing, based on the research that was done by Deloitte. So then Gallup did a study separate from the Deloitte one, where it looked at what are these elements of engagement that we need to look at. So 12 points are looked at. These are employees who indicated this as part of the study. Now, not in any particular order, one of the points raised by employees was that employees, they do want to know what is expected from them. Clearly so, they do want to know what is expected from them. So if it means part of the agenda in setting an engagement agenda with an employee is to discuss what is expected from you, it is a meaningful contributor towards a positive engagement. That's number one. Number two, the employees do need to have tools to do the work. I spoke about at the performance agreement level, there are resources, there's a resource section. Those very tools that need to be indicated there as resources, they becomes very instrumental to indicate an employer's commitment to assist employees in doing their work. I do not believe that, and I might be completely wrong, because I don't think I've ever worked with necessarily everyone, but I think in the deeper aspect of one's being, everyone has an ability or a drive at least to do their best. Now, does not mean that people wake up every day and want to do the same, but there is an indication that every individual employee has got an ability to do their level best. Does the environment and the person himself, is the person himself conscious of such drive, and does it do anything to improve on what it's able to do? So now if you look at some of these three as we move down, these are some of the points that, according to Gallup, employees did indicate as they prefer them to be engaged or discussed with. So that means on the 6 first points out of the 12, there's already an agenda that an employer can start to set with its employees. And the one in red are the one that touches some of the elements of performance management, as it were, because performance management starts by stipulating what is expected from you. Comes at the later stage when you have performed, the question was asked, if I have been able to perform and met or exceeded the expectations, is there anything that I will be recognized with? It's a question. It's not a demand, it's a question. Contrary, if I have not met minimum requirements and underperformed, is there anything that it will be done to me to at least allow me to improve or to be penalized or to be rehabilitated? It's a question, not a demand. So on the point of recognition, you want to ask the question, and if the company does have some recognition mechanism from certificates, from big fat checks, from a gift, from hampers, from non-financial rewards, it's a fair question to answer. But these are options the organization can adopt. They are not supposed to be embedded unless if the organization wishes to do the same. Point number 5. Is there an employee who does not want to be valued? Whilst we perform certain duties, it appears that employees do want to be recognized and be valued as people. So a simple pat at the back and say, Stembiso, thank you very much for the contribution you've made. I mean, without necessarily going into the technicalities, or should I say the politicking part of it, the please call me situation of Vodacom becomes a classical case. Whatever the details might be, and I'm not involved nor close enough onto that particular case, but you can just realize that there are many other employees who sit back and say, you know, as a matter of fact, I feel the same with the gentleman because I've done so much for this company. Is that I might not have any form of documentation to prove that I'm the one who came up with the same, but I feel the organization did not appreciate my contribution and my value in the manner and the way that I did. It happens. Guys are innovative at work. Girls, ladies, men and women, they come every single day, they do things. Not because they're expected to be compensated. But if it means it comes across that the organization has benefited hugely from that, it's only fair for those people to be valued accordingly. So have someone encourage their development. As a matter of fact, we spoke about the mentor and the coach. As a manager, as a line manager, and as a leader, depending what type of a leader, you are bound and perhaps expected at least to shine some light onto your subordinate for them to become better by virtue of developing them, or at least allowing them, or at least facilitating a process or enabling the environment to develop them. So the red ones are the ones that are emphasizing the element of performance engagement. All 12 points are relevant to the engagement in general. Now, therefore, all what we are saying is that if the engagement subject, you might have thought it is over valued or over exaggerated. If you look at these 12 points, as a manager, ask yourself some of these questions as to, do you engage your employees on any of those 12 points? You have enough to engage your employees on. As a line manager, as a head of department, as a unit head, as a supervisor, as a leader in your workplace, you can. The opinion on its own, sitting in a meeting and people throwing opinions, not just because it will be utilized, but for a person to have changed his mind in the focus to think about a positive situation or a possible solution, that on its own need to be acknowledged. Because he could have opted not to say anything. But on the basis that he has come up with an opinion, and this opinion seems to be positive, maybe if you can assist to ask further and interrogate and assist to unpack it further, a solution that can assist the company will emerge. Hence, managers can be expected to be facilitators. The worthwhile in terms of what you do, without you saying, if you give some employees, and I think you might have seen in some of the Zondo Commission, as we all observe some of these, some people are paid huge salaries for doing nothing. So whilst they acknowledge the pay, they do know that they're not doing anything worthwhile in the company. Obviously, because of politics in this particular case, it's just an example to make. So imagine on those aspects where we don't have cameras happening, you're sitting right at the corner, you came every day, you just drink coffee, you do as little as you can, and you expect a salary at the end of the day. I don't think that would make you feel good. You can't just feel good that you're not doing anything worthwhile at work. So it's natural that people want to do things that are worthwhile, want to do things that can contribute. So if the environment provides such, they will obviously start to drive towards that. And if the majority of our employees can be given such opportunity, I do believe some of the best employees can emerge in the process. Quality work in terms of core workers, we are teams by nature. People are social beings. So teams will always be part of a bigger element of success in organizations. So we're not looking for individual superstars here. We're looking for the complete team which is balanced, that works together to achieve the goal. Hence, we talk about the department and we talk about the institution. Positive work relationship by nature, and again, I'm using these as examples that whilst people might have conflict amongst each other, it is possible for them to work together towards a common goal with their differences. So it does not mean if they're different, that means people need to be able to fight and then without looking at each other necessarily going forward. So looking at all these 12 points, I'm suggesting strongly that if we want to start an agenda of engaging employees, we can just choose which one of these 12 we believe we can start with. And in retrospect, by engaging some of these key points and engaging our employees transparently and honestly, we can only work towards a positive outcome. Now, performance management system, as it were, does provide an environment for us to set these agendas. When we put and prepare the performance agreement, what are we going to be talking about? I need to know from an employee that now they can see the document that we are preparing. What other aspects do they want us to talk about? How far do you want to grow? How far, what are your ambitions in terms of a promotion, not promotions, but in terms of moving the ladder within the organization? How much are you committed to fight for that? What kind of a person are you, and how are you willing to be engaged? So there are two sets which are available out there, as alluded, which allow all these things to be at the sorry, to be available as opposed to rely only on one person saying this. Talking about the TMA method again, where we extracted the competencies that are being used in some organizations, including what we have covered within the university, you are able then to see, okay, so STEMIS is a kind of a person who prefers this type of communication environment. He prefers this kind, and you are able then to say, okay, I now understand this being better than I would have if I did not get an opportunity to interact with him using some of these talent management tools. Therefore, our agenda for engagement is much more smoother because at least both of us are able to focus on the same kind of pillars of what we want to engage with. So all what we are saying in short is that performance management planning, performance management broadly, that provides a fertile environment for such of this engagement to take place. Because one would have argued and say, yeah, I hear you, but what should I engage my employees on? At least the 12 points are now giving us such a view. Now, as part of this discussion, I would like us just to take this moment. It's about a 10 minutes video where we dip into the late Jack Welch's perspectives on dealing with personnel, performance, leadership, and management in the workplace. Like I said, it will be naive to deal with the subject of performance management independent of the broader talent management perspective. So we're going to take a moment and observe and hear and listen to some of his articulations. These are his articulations. They are not intended to influence the organization, institution, but they're intended to reflect what other leaders are doing out there. And it could have been many other leaders we pull in that we can learn from. But in this case, with the limited time and material access, we can look at what Jack Welch is saying. And then we can do some short reflections after that. And I'll do the same just to check.
The day you become a leader, it stops being about you. It starts being about them, your people. It's the most exciting thing you can do is to build that team around you. Make them all feel tall. Make them all feel strong, bright, powerful. Give them the self-confidence. Inject it every day. Coach them when they're off base a little. Well, the first time you become a manager, you have to make that transition. And it may be the most important transition you will ever make. It's that transition that says, hey, I'm now going to win because of the reflected glory of my team. Well, I try and think about it with a pretty simple formula. 4 E's and a P. E, energy. The enormous energy to compete in a global world. Second E, energize. To energize people, to excite them around you to do things. It's no good to have lots of energy if you can't energize the other people. Third, the edge. The ability to say yes and no, and not maybe. Nothing's worse than a leader with maybe. Or bring it back in a couple of months, we'll look at it again. You want somebody that'll have edge, say yes or no. And then you want the fourth, the people that get it done, execute, deliver the goods. And you want that all wrapped in a big P. How much passion do they have for the job? How much do they want it? How much do they see what they can bring to it? want a certain value, you reward it just the way you would making a great number. I think you get the behavior in a corporation around the values or behaviors you reward and punish. Their performance is a ticket to the game. Their adherence to values is what gets them promoted. They buy into the culture. They exhibit the values every day. People feel it in their bones. And by doing that, you then get people that don't do that. You say, look, you don't belong here. You've got performance, but you don't have the values. Have the values, have the performance. That's easy. Onward and upward. Have the no performance and no values. That's easy. Out. Thirdly, have the values and don't have the performance. Give them another chance. They've got the stuff you want. They're behaving the way you want. They may be in a tough environment. Give them a second chance in a different look. I'll show you exactly how we did it. We used a circle. We'd have the value. Hate bureaucracy was a value. And we'd have a circle that would be quarter filled in, half filled in, or all filled in. Same thing. So you'd look at the person, you'd see their performance, and then you'd see these 5 circles. 2 of them are quarters, 2 of them are half, and 1's full. That's not so hard. It's no more precise. You can't be precise about it. It's a subjective evaluation. Management's not a science. It's not a precise thing. It's your best judgment. Do these people have the behaviors that are going to drive your unit towards achieving its mission? And if they don't belong around you. Appraisals are candid and frequent. I gave 4 a year. I never gave a raise where I didn't sit down with a small piece of paper, handwritten note. Here's what I like about what you've done. Here's what you can do to improve. Second, at a bonus time. Here's what I like about you. Here's what you can do to improve. Same thing's true at stock option time. Same 4 times a year, and then at appraisal time. So 4 times a year, there was a piece of paper in front of somebody and a dialogue about their performance and where they stood. Let me tell you how it works. When people really have an open appraisal system and they're told they're in the bottom 10, you don't have to fire them. And they go out on their own and they get a good job and they're thankful to you. It's only when they don't know. Who wants to be in this 10% group and stay and come to work every day? If the CEO or the head of HR or the senior vice presidents have in fact made clear what the values are. For example, boundaryless behavior, accepting ideas from everywhere. You have to then, when somebody goes and gets an idea on productivity and stuff and brings it back home, they have to be celebrated. You've got to exaggerate what they did. You've got to try and excite other people to go out and see it. So all these things are behavioral. So what you want to do is to get this crowd to see that doing it the way you want it, the values you want, like, for example, candor, will get rewarded. So it's just making the values real, not some plaque on a wall. They know every turkey in the place. And so when you're not acting, all you're doing is making yourself look weak. Because they're all saying, if I had your job, I'd be doing that. And they're sort of frustrated that you're letting two people over here get away with murder and you're not doing this and that to the others. That's the way it works. If you think you're the only one that knows who the performers and non-performers are, you're way off. Your organization knows totally. Well, I was CEO for 10 years, and I hadn't really done it to the extent that I should have. But in 1990, at a meeting of 500 of the top managers of General Electric, we had removed 5 senior vice presidents over the past 12 months prior, and had let them go. And I went to the annual meeting in January of the top management and explained why all 5, with great results, had to leave the company. I explained that they were good people, they had met their goals, but for values violations that were consistent, they wouldn't promote women. Another one absolutely wouldn't globalize. He couldn't get out away from a radius of 100 miles from his headquarters. We had another one that was totally not boundaryless. We had a value that you had to be open to ideas from anyone. Everything had to be invented by him or his team. And he wouldn't look outside for ideas. And we said that. And we explained in detail. You could have heard a pin drop. We explained in detail why each one of them had to go. They weren't bad people. They just didn't have the values we wanted to go into the next decade. Now, that changed forever the belief in our company that you could play games. Look, candor and transparency are critical to becoming a great company. They're absolutely foundational. The idea that anybody should come to work wondering where they stand is crazy. Management owes it to their people to let people know where they stand so that when bad times come, people aren't surprised. People don't walk down the hall and say, hey, look, it's time for you to go, Mary. And Mary says, me? Why me? And you say to her, oh, Mary, you weren't very good. And Mary says, but I've been here 31 years. Why didn't you tell me? That's the cruelest form of management. I believe in the core principles of setting a mission and setting values to achieve that mission. I believe in candor as a fundamental groundswell of any organization. I believe in differentiation to build the best team. I believe in voice and dignity. Every single person having the voice to say what they want, to do what they want, to have a chance. I believe that stuff. I manage that way. I love to see people achieve. Nothing gives me a greater kick. I loved, in my job, seeing people get promoted. I love seeing people grow. It's a turn on beyond any project you'll ever work on.
Okay, that was Jack the legendary Jack Welch. What's your say? How would you reflect on Jack Welch's philosophy? It's very clear. This is his own, and it went through a great length to instill it in his environment and supported it and backed it until the last day he served as a GE manager. For those who might be familiar with his environment, he actually used to train all his executives himself on the philosophy, on the values of the organization. But that's just a highlight. I would like to pick up on your observation on Jack's philosophy as part of our discussion on this workshop. Just unmute and you can go for it.
Look, I agree with the principle of giving everyone a voice. So I sort of am similar in my style as well, in my department, and my team knows that we sit there because end of the day, I don't know everything. So I fully agree with that. So and it also it makes my life a lot easier when I know that people are taking ownership of ideas because they came up with them and they believe in them. So I agree with what Jack was saying.
Yeah, thanks very much. Any other observations? In reflection to Jack's wisdom, I call it wisdom.
Can I just agree with Shanti and Jack? But what we also need to realize is that the idea that people must openly share their ideas is not as easy as it sounds on paper. First of all, the environment has to be futile for that to happen. So what I mean is the management or line management first has to create that kind of environment, because whenever there's a meeting, I always notice that some of us will be sitting there and management will talk and talk and talk, and no one is going to say anything. But as soon as the meeting ends and everyone goes to their own little corners, you'll see people saying, "As we should have done this, we should have done that. I was thinking about this, I was thinking about that," simply because they know that the environment during there is not conducive for them to share their ideas. So what management wants to do, they want to create this narrative. Hey guys, I'm waiting, give me your ideas. But they know themselves. So how do you create an environment that's conducive for people to be comfortable enough to spread their ideas? Thank you.
Mr. Lamin, and that's a very good question. And perhaps one of the big differences with what we are observing from Jack is that we are hearing from the CEO himself. That means if he's committed to it, he will make sure it works. The difficulty comes when people at lower level position feel this can be done and can be executed, only to find that the management, by virtue of facilitating the environment, does not allow or enable it. Because the culture becomes what becomes common behaviors within the environment. If people know that to go to meetings and talk is just going to be a lip service, they would rather talk behind the closed doors. That's a culture that is facilitated by such an environment. So Jack Welch talks about candor, which talk about frankness, openness, transparency amongst all parties. So most likely during his time, and I'm not sure because I've never been to his environment, you will not necessarily be terminated or fired purely because you might have voiced out your opinion. That is why when he called all his senior vice presidents and senior managers to a campus and spend time to lecture on this, he was expecting them to reflect back on what they think could be done. So in terms of creating such an environment, you don't just facilitate it or write it on paper and hope it will fly. You also demonstrate it as the manager. So it is true, indeed, that the influence, if it comes from top down to bottom of this particular nature, will obviously probably find better traction and it will thrive. But if it means just a couple of us, me, you, and 2 other colleagues, we feel we can drive the organization this way, it might happen that the management or senior leadership feels threatened by our thoughts and ideas, and they might be keen to shut us down and probably discourage us from going that particular route. So it's always a bit of a question as to where such is facilitated, if I were to say. But yes, correct observation, I think. Any other additional comment?
Can I just quickly extend on that? Because the idea of creating this environment is just not, it doesn't rely on putting it on paper or on policy only. I just wanted to quickly be honest here. When we looked at Mr. Jack speak, like how many of us would be comfortable to share an idea in front of Jack? I don't know whether it's because he exudes confidence, but so I'm trying to get to a point of creating an environment is not just about putting it down on paper and telling them, hey, I want you to give me ideas. It's also a sense of persona. There's got to be something warm about your order for people to feel comfortable enough to express your ideas. Jack said to himself that he doesn't like the edge. He doesn't like the word maybe. It's either yes or no. I think personally, it's going to be hard to be comfortable with someone who's not going to say maybe. If someone's going to say, if it's a yes and a no, man. So it's either what you're saying is a yes or what you're saying is a no. Surely, whether I'm on the mark or I'm a tad bit off the mark, Jack is going to say no or Jack is going to say yes. I mean, yes or no. So it's kind of difficult for anyone to be comfortable enough to express the idea. So what I'm just trying to say is that we must be careful of the idea that creating a comfortable environment is just on policy, on paper, or just by someone saying it. There is an order that surrounds someone that makes it comfortable for people to be able to express their ideas. Thank you.
Yes, and I fully agree with you. Obviously, I cannot personally comment much about how Jack, but understanding how some of his facilitation used to be done, it might be possible that managers would find it easy to engage him. The other example, very close to home, is an example of Discovery. For those who might be close enough to Discovery, Discovery has got a very strong culture of innovation. Most of the divisions at Discovery were not created or developed as a result of management only. Themba Baloyi is a classical example. After he did his own study, he went to management and presented a concept of Discovery in Shaw. He was not at anywhere senior level in terms of Discovery. He was somewhere just amongst the numbers of employees. He presented it, they looked at it. Today, he's one of the directors, and Discovery has got a division called Discovery in Shaw. As you know, it's growing in leaps and bounds. And when he shared his experience, he was shy to stand up and present it. But the environment, because it was conducive, I mean, one would have argued and say, Adrian Gore is a difficult person to interact with. And there are many other examples. These examples, we use them not because we say do as they have done, but we are trying to facilitate a situation of saying, if an organization were to consider doing this, doesn't it think it can benefit more than just believing that what management is saying will be the only thing that flies? So there are quite a number of examples, and I agree with you, Mr. Dlamini, of saying writing on paper and saying it alone does not cut it, but demonstrating it. Now, that demonstration part is a test where you might have seen a manager in action and engaging, facilitating, encouraging, or discouraging some of the views on the ground. So I might not necessarily argue further as to say, no, but he did it or he did not. Understanding the culture and what tends to be documented about the organization, I think that on its own sense seeks to show that if it means Discovery is known to be an innovative entity, as you might have seen it now, if you look at its trends, and I'm not necessarily trying to punt it, I don't have any shares or whatsoever, but I'm just trying to say if you were to compare with its peers on a number of aspects, it has shown that innovation has actually set it apart from many. How has it achieved that? Is encouraging everyone within Discovery to come up with ideas that they might be seen innovative for them to be endorsed by management. Does it mean all of them have been encouraged or taken up or accepted? Maybe not. But if it's a cultural fit, that means the majority would have been considered, at least. And the test of it is really when we start articulating, sharing it. And to an extent, there's a quote by Jack from his book where he says, to his amazement, he used to say so many things to try to influence the organizational thinking and the thinking pattern to everyone so many times that even on the 100th time, some people were hearing it for the first time. So I think in the context of trying to promote the saying and the doing, it has to be repeated a number of times so that other people can be able to start to understand it. So I think as a manager, leader, or a person of influential position, talking you can't stop. Doing you obviously have to show, hence the values, hence the behavioral aspect. So a combination of them, all of them combined. I think part of what I'm rather emphasizing is that it becomes relatively easier if someone of influence like Jack says it and therefore lead by examples. It becomes a bit difficult if it is aspired by some of us at the bottom, yet the leadership is not in support of that. I think that's part of what I'm alluding in terms of the comment. But I agree, it has to be a total picture. It has to be a total, what you call a conduct, not only on documentation, not only on paper, but it should be observable and be followed through as well as it might be said. Just to close off with, on my slide, I've got a slide where he was talking about the bottom 10. For those who might obviously follow it, I know the time now is 2 minutes past 12, so we're going to close off with this slide to close off with. So those who are in the bottom 10, the general 70, and then the top 20. That's what he was talking about in this particular case. For an example, those who are in the top 20 will be rewarded handsomely because they've shown exceptional performance levels. And those who are in the middle 70 will be acknowledged and be encouraged to actually improve their performance. Those in the bottom 10 will be let go. In his own way, he will take all the necessary data based on the performance assessment evaluations that would have been done at a particular point in time and plug it into a bell-shaped cave like this and then be able to start engaging accordingly. So he himself says, those people who know that they're not performing consistently, the bottom 10, if you tell them and give them all the opportunities to grow, some of them will realize that they're not good enough in this organization and they will go and then they will just leave. So, but this is his own way of how he used to do it. And I'm sure long after he has left, it might have changed within GE as to how things are being done. But at least there was a method, there was a formidable platform, there was a formidable philosophy that he was able to back with as to how he was dealing with issues of performance. The question is, in the other organizations, including our own, do we have some sort of kind of a structured way of engaging employees, at least allowing them to see where they stand? Because I think that's, in a nutshell, what performance management system is all about. And I would like to take a pause now where we are at so that we can be able to go and take our lunch break. Unless obviously if there are any questions, I'm more than willing to respond to it. But thanks very much for the contribution in observing and commenting on the video that we have seen. Not that we are promoting a particular school of thought, but we are just sharing with some of the industry leaders and best practices as to what is happening elsewhere. We can obviously do our own in our own spectrum and see how it can benefit us all. Okay, so the time now is indicated. It is 5:12. If we can come back at 25 to 1. When you come back at 25 to 1, we'll be wrapping up on the theory and background, and then we'll be then moving on to the practical side where we look at all the templates for the organization in terms of what we are able to work with in fulfilling the performance management strategy, objective, goals, and purpose. And then we can look at some of the practical examples which a Prof PM is able to respond to. Then we'll be preparing to end our session thereafter. I hope you're going to enjoy your lunch. Apologies, lunch is not provided virtually. But I hope you have enough time to grab something and a bite and we can come back and engage and onto the subject. Thank you very much. See you at 25 to 1.